So we get into that time of the year. Well, it is that time of the year where everyone is thinking about Christmas. And it's always a time of the year where I always have this type of conversation when I see people, okay? Alright? You know, if I bump into anybody or I can see anybody in the community or it might be members of the congregation, they always say to me, Phil, you must be really busy at the moment. You must be really busy. And me being the humble priest, I always say, of course I am. I'm so busy. I am really busy indeed. And of course it is a busy time of the year. But a couple of years ago I remember somebody who was a lot more direct than I was bargaining for said to me, rather than the usual polite small talk conversation, you move on to something else, said to me, well, Phil, what actually are you busy doing? What actually am I busy doing? And I was taken aback. What? You're asking me? Because actually that, for me, is a key question about this season of Advent. In amongst the world which is so busy at this time of the year, preparing for Christmas, what are we actually busy doing? And why are we doing it? Now, there's nothing wrong with being busy. Busy is associated with hard work, and that's just part of life, isn't it? We have to be busy to do the routines of life, to look after our family, to care for the ones that we love, to go to work in the routines that we want to try our best. There's nothing wrong with being busy. But there's something about the way that I think people live their lives today that we are encouraged to live our lives in a frantic way, dashing about, doing this and doing that. We're encouraged to do so. In fact, you see the culture all around us. Constantly we are being told to shop now. It's Black Friday. It's Monday something. It's, we've got to do our shopping now. It's almost like busyness. It seems to be this inevitable force that we are sucked into to live our lives energetically and frantically. But we know actually that to live our lives like this is not good for our mental well-being. It's not good for our health. And I think sometimes it's really important that we kind of move away from that culture of being frantic that I think is often in our workplaces and obviously in the consumer world. And just think about, well, why do I need to be busy? What do I need to do? Maybe I need to make some choices in my life to sometimes step away from that busyness. And so we enter the season of Advent, and you'll see that the readings that we read in church now have a very apocalyptic sense. Jesus is talking about the imminent arrival, sometimes talking about what we might describe as the end of the world. In today's the Gospel from St. Matthew, Jesus, of course, is talking about being ready. You do not know when the Son of Man will come again. You need to be ready. You need to be alert. And it's true that when Jesus said these words, and the first disciples, the first church, they would have actually taken these words, really importantly. They would have said, look, something's going to happen quickly, imminently, maybe in the coming days, maybe in the coming years. We need to be ready. Over time, perhaps it's been interpreted in a slightly different way, in that being ready, it doesn't mean about living our lives frantically. It doesn't mean storing up baked beans in our larder and getting ready for the end of the world. It often just means that being ready means just being available. Just being alert in our minds and our bodies and our spirits to what God is doing in the world. The very small, beautiful, gentle, subtle movements of God that we see all around us that so often we miss if we are just too busy to notice them. For me, that's what Advent is about. It's about trying to notice perhaps the things that are on our hearts, the attention that we need to make to what is going on in our own world, but also just to take that time to look around us, to step outside of our normal routines, and to perhaps think about and listen to what God is doing amongst us. It's uncomfortable, it's discomforting to come out of our routine. So perhaps we like, and I do this, I like the comfort of being busy. I like the comfort because it's so associated with my identity, my job. It's what I want to do, but sometimes I need to just step away. And so that's what I think Jesus calls us to do. He doesn't want us to rush around like headless chickens. He wants us just to notice him, to be available in this world. Some of our churches at the moment, I know St Martin's are doing this, and Walker Parish Church has also been thinking about this, have been thinking about how we can intentionally listen to people in our very congregations, perhaps people that we think we know very well, but also people in our community. And we've been encouraged to think about these conversations or one-to-ones and doing them out there. And that is just perhaps spending time out of our normal routine and just spending time in one-to-one conversation with people, listening to them, trying to understand their story, understand where they're at with church and their faith, understanding what they care about, and understanding perhaps what they feel are the needs of this place in our parishes. Spending those times to have those deliberate conversations, and then also having an opportunity to share our own story and our own thoughts. And the idea is that through actually taking the time and being available to listen to people, then we as a church can kind of renew ourselves. We can actually think about perhaps, are we in touch with the communities that we serve? Do we understand what the needs are? Do we kind of think sometimes about perhaps how the needs of the church and often the things that concern us in the church community are often the same things that other people outside the church think about, and perhaps we can work in partnership with our community. We have a wonderful tradition in mind of working with the community, replenishing our resources through that. So maybe that is something that for me that is quite inspiring, but as I said, uncomfortable. When perhaps we make some intentional choices in our life, in our normal routines, to say we as a church are going to spend time to listen. Now, as many of you know, I'm leaving soon. I'm going to Bradford in January, not January, but later on next year. But I'll be leaving at the end of January. And it always makes me nostalgic for everything that I've done here in the past 16 years and the people I've worked with and so forth. But I have to say, and this is always my confession to people, that I think this is often, one of the deep guilts of the church and the clergy, that I think sometimes I've just been too busy. Sometimes I'm not actually spending enough time hanging around and being available to people where they are. Quite often, in my ministry, I've needed someone directly to ask me, well, if you are busy, Phil, what actually are you busy doing? And when I look at what actually I'm busy doing, yes, I think I've done some good things and they're always great, wonderful things that I would do as a normal part of my ministry. But sometimes I have to think, you know what? Sometimes in my weeks, in the months, sometimes I'm busy doing things that I think are important, but actually are not that important at all. And I wish I was more available and open. Been a lot more hanging around in grace rather than sometimes being absorbed in my work in the church. That doesn't mean to say that my work in the church is important, but it means to say it's about realigning and saying, look, how we as a church, how can we be in touch with our community? How can we be available to our community? And sometimes I think in the church, I'm speaking about myself here, and often I'm speaking about the national church as well. The church is so absorbed in its own politics, its own needs, often its own buildings, that it doesn't take notice of what God is doing in its communities, in its parishes. And that is the challenge for the church, that sometimes we need these Advent moments to take ourselves out of our normal patterns and routines and just to listen to what God is doing out there in our communities. Because I believe that God is doing really exciting things in the church and outside the church. I think I can see so many people asking, inquiring about what God is doing. And I therefore kind of leave this place and I leave this church not feeling like, oh, everything's just a big burden and oh gosh, what the future of the church. I leave this place with a lot of hope. What God is doing in this community, what God is doing in your lives, what God is doing through mine, and us working together. And I'm really excited for the future and to hear about in many years' time what God continues to do in this place. Amen.